Welcome to the Smart Recovery Meeting Agenda and Toolset Overview. My name is John Bala, and I've been a certified Smart Recovery Facilitator since 2017. Before we get into the content, a brief disclaimer. The thoughts, ideas, and commentary expressed herein are my own and do not necessarily represent those of Smart Recovery. In addition, this presentation was developed as a teaching tool to be used as an overview presentation of the two SMART meetings I facilitate. As such, it does not necessarily reflect the content, process, or structure of other SMART recovery meetings. That said, other SMART facilitators are welcome to use this presentation for their own meetings or as they see fit. As for meeting structure, we start the meeting by asking if there was anyone who is at this meeting for the first time, and if so, please introduce themselves. Next, we check in by going around the virtual room from the top left-hand corner of Zoom in gallery or grid view until we work our way to the bottom right-hand corner. Check-in typically takes 30 to 60 seconds per participant, where you tell us who you are, why you're here, provide any recent successes or challenges, and recommend a topic for discussion. In addition, the check-in affords us all the opportunity to see where everyone is at right now, which will help us build group cohesion. Currently, we are going through an overview of the Smart Recovery agenda highlighted in yellow to provide a baseline understanding for the discussion, since it is likely that some in attendance will be SMART veterans while others may be attending their first SMART meeting and everything in between. Next up is the discussion. Immediately following this presentation, I will be asking the group to recommend a topic for discussion. The topic is typically a problem or an issue someone is currently going through and is willing to entrust the group to collectively work on a solution. As the facilitator, my role will be to map the topic to one or more SMART tools to gain greater insight that can be applied to that end. As such, this is a working meeting whose aim is to create different solution strategies from which we can apply to our lives almost immediately. The only ground rules are we ask that everyone please refrain from giving advice or opinions. That said, questions are a key to learning and are strongly encouraged. Finally, the checkout, which is just like the check-in, except it's at the end of the meeting, affords everyone the opportunity to express their key takeaways from the meeting and perhaps assign a goal for themselves for the following week to keep them motivated. SMART background. SMART is an acronym that stands for Self-Management and Recovery Training, with an emphasis on 1, self-management, in that you are ultimately responsible for your decision-making, and 2, training, in that, like any other achievement that requires effort and practice, SMART Recovery is no different. SMART is also the world's largest secular self-help addiction recovery organization, with over 3,500 meetings per week across 24 countries. The handbook, at the time of this recording, has been translated into 13 languages. SMART was established in 1993, and it came out of an organization known as Rational Recovery, which began about 10 years prior. A lot of people ask, what's the difference between AA and SMART? Okay, well, the two organizations are similar in that both are nonprofit 501c organizations that rely largely on volunteers and donations. In addition, both organizations can be said to be self-help organizations whose mission is to help others recover from addictions. The organizations are quite different in that AA is a faith-based organization promoting powerlessness by surrendering one's will and life over to a higher power or God, whereas SMART is a science-based organization that promotes empowerment through greater self-awareness and more rational decision-making that aligns with personal goals, values, and well-being. some additional key differentiators. Anti-shaming. SMART discourages shaming languages such as alcoholics, drug addicts, or junkies. 2, as stated previously, SMART uses science-based and evidence-based approaches to addiction. This also means that SMART is anti-dogmatic and anti-ideological, relying on evidence and some humanist principles for guidance. Thirdly, many of our tools and strategies help you expand your conscious awareness through self-reflection, meditation, or similar protocols. The mantra here is that you can't solve a problem you're not aware of. As such, the more we are aware, the more self-empowered we become. In addition, we do not use scare tactics such as your disease is doing push-ups in the parking lot as you work on your recovery, or a pickle will never become a cucumber. And lastly, the multi-dimensional concept of the power of choice. Here, we leave it up to you to select your goal. For most, it's abstinence, while for others, it may be harm reduction. And for others, still, the mere domain of addiction can be transcended to include optimal well-being of oneself, others, and life generally. Again, while SMART is neither a dogma nor an ideology, as already stated, it does have a four-legged stool framework, beginning with creating and maintaining motivation, because it's difficult to change a behavior if you are not motivated to do so. Coping with urges and cravings. This is the only tenet that explicitly addresses one of the most common side effects of addictive behavior. 3, managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, the psychology and philosophy of SMART recovery, or more colloquially, all the activity that takes place between our ears. And 4, leading a balanced life to provide a more concrete and stable living foundation. And worth reiterating, we leave it up to you to determine your goal. Some examples include abstinence, harm reduction, or well-being. Now we will go through each of the 4 tenets with greater detail, beginning with 1, creating and maintaining motivation. As I already mentioned, it is most difficult to change your behavior if you are not motivated to do so. As such, this tenet is presented first for that very reason. Here are a few strategies for kickstarting motivation. Start with setting one realistic goal. I will now present 2 versions of myself to underscore the importance of adding structure to the goal. Both John A. and John B. will have the same goal. And that goal is to go regularly to SMART recovery meetings with consistency. Okay, so for John A., he says, I think it would be a good idea to set a goal for next week for going to meetings. I'm going to give some thought to that. And then John B. says, I'm going to follow that SMART goal acronym as illustrated on the slide. In so doing, I will quantify the goal as attending at least 2 meetings next week. In addition, I will choose the meetings based on my schedule to make it easier for me to attend. I will then add those 2 meetings to my iCalendar with 2 alerts to nudge me 2 hours before each meeting so that I let the structure and process do the heavy lifting. I just have to show up. So the question is, who is more likely to accomplish their goal, John A. or John B.? In fact, did John A. ever really articulate a clear and measurable goal? He did not. Another way to kickstart motivation is to return to your passions, hobbies, and interests that you somehow stopped doing as your addiction continued to demand more and more of your time. Whether it's cooking or biking, reading or writing, playing a musical instrument, going for walks, or good old volunteer work, doing things you enjoy is proof positive that you need not suffer in order to recover from addiction. In fact, depending on your general disposition and other life factors, you can use this formula to re-architect your life one decision at a time. That's right, it's not too late to become that person you always dreamed of. With effort and practice, that dream can become a reality. Tenet number 2, coping with urges and cravings. An important fact to keep in mind. Many urges and cravings last mere minutes, not hours. Keeping this fact in easily accessible memory can make all the difference between experiencing an inconvenient and short-lived episode to a lapse or relapse that can last for days, weeks, months, or even longer. Consider this analogy. A mailbox and what exists between your ears share a commonality. Neither controls the inbound content. For the mailbox, the sources are easily traceable, but for the mind, the situation is much more complex. None of us, for example, can predict what thought, feeling, emotion, impulse, or what have you will appear in your mind 47 seconds from now. Stuff just happens. That said, most of us have developed an intuitive system for sorting and prioritizing our mail, including rejecting the junk mail without needing to even open it. As such, our ability to manage the content that shows up in our mind can benefit from our mailbox experience. The big difference is that physical or digital mail enters our consciousness as a banal and/or routine experience. For our mind, however, much of what lands between our ears is adjudicated quickly and automatically without us being aware or conscious of what's happening. More on this later in a separate video. In any case, I have found designating urges and cravings as analogous to junk mail as a reliable and relatively easy way of acknowledging the offer consciously and then rejecting it on the same rational grounds. The same rational grounds we pitch the junk mail in the trash without even opening it. Here we just described one of the many contexts in which SMART's power of choice can manifest. In this case, reflecting on past experiences that lead to relapse while also being aware that most urges and cravings only last a few minutes is often sufficient to experience the event as a choice that you can now process consciously and rationally, rather than your actions be taken automatically without the self-awareness that affords this condition. When this happens, the lack of choice only hits home once its negative consequences have occurred. So yes, the power of choice is a very big deal. Probably two of the most common used tools for coping with urges and cravings are 1. Call a friend. 2. Go to a meeting. For more information on coping with urges and cravings, consult the Smart Recovery website, the Smart Recovery Handbook, and the Smart Recovery YouTube channel. The third tenet of managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors is probably the most comprehensive and exhaustive of the 4 pillars of Smart Recovery. It is here where we get into the psychology and philosophy of rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT, as developed by Dr. Ellis. I also like to refer to managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, again, as all that stuff taking place between your ears. Key components of REBT: the cost-benefit analysis, the ABCs, the unconditionals, and the absolutes. So let's get into it. As you probably know, there are many ways in which to construct a CBA. This particular model I learned from one of the presenters at the Smart Recovery International Conference held in Chicago in 2019. As you can see, the matrix is broken into 4 quadrants: short and long-term benefits of addiction and short and long-term consequences of addiction. So we start with the short-term benefits. At this point, you may ask, well, this sounds good. What's the problem? Well, here's the problem. The array of consequences which renders addictive behavior unsustainable. And to cap it off, there are no long-term benefits for addictive behavior. We now return to our between your ears concept and introduce the belief behavior barrier. As you can see, we have added two circles to represent two different belief characteristics. S1 or System 1 beliefs, which can also be used interchangeably with attitudes or philosophy. S1 is where irrational beliefs, including those that lead to addictive behavior, tend to thrive. S1 beliefs also tend to be fast, automatic, unconscious, fixed, and rigid, and where heuristics and biases are also well represented. Conversely, System 2 beliefs are slow, conscious, analytical, and lazy. Of course, if you read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, these concepts will be very familiar to you. In any case, it is here where we do our conscious thinking and decision making. S2 beliefs and attitudes are slow to process because they require effort, whereas System 1 requires little to no effort. In any case, the more System 2 we use, the less System 1 has control over our decision making. But as you can see right now, this stuff happening between your ears is a private matter. We have all had experiences where we had an idea or an offer or something or another, but decided after careful thought to say no thanks. When we do that, the entire event remains a private matter, unless we decide to tell someone about it. What matters here is that it is when we take action that beliefs or attitudes now manifest in the public or social domain. It's no longer a private matter, and as we know too well, all behaviors have consequences. So what if we could intervene at the private domain so that we could preempt these irrational beliefs that would result in addictive behavior from ever leaving the confines of our private domain? That is what the next few slides are about, how we can actually preempt irrational beliefs so they do not become behaviors. This brings us to a few of the models underlying our ABT. But before we get into the brass tacks, it's important to understand Albert Ellis's thesis about psychology and self-disturbance. He asserts that it is we who disturb ourselves by holding irrational beliefs that are untrue and unhelpful, and I might add, often unconscious or automatic. Or as Henry Ford famously said, if you believe you can, or you believe you cannot, either way, you're right. In other words, we really believe what we believe, even when we are completely wrong, which is why beliefs are so consequential and unforgiving. Here, Ellis aspires to get us right with our own beliefs so we can stop disturbing ourselves. It is here where we introduce the ABC DiBs model, or simply ABC for short. This is the model for self-intervention and intervention designed to uncover irrational beliefs and to reject them before they can become behaviors, as I will illustrate in the next slide. What is currently displayed is an illustration of the ABC model. As you can see, the A in red stands for activating event or adversity. Many refer to this as the trigger that leads to problematic behavior. Next is the B, also in red, that stands for, you guessed it, the belief or attitude about the activating event. Skipping down to the bottom, we see that beliefs, as we already know by now, that are acted upon produce consequences, with the C letter in black. Herein lies a snapshot of the ABC model in its default condition. An activating event produces a belief about what happened. The default condition, somewhat simplified, is to act automatically or unconsciously on that belief or attitude, which produces a consequence. However, we know from experience there are many times when we're not simply behaving on autopilot, and use the best analytical abilities our System 2 has to offer to present the conditions of a choice between at least two options. Notice how, in the default condition, no such options are presented. In any case, once System 2 is involved, we can reject the default condition by taking no action at all, based on the likely negative outcome of doing so would produce. As such, no action produces no consequence. Next up is the DiBs component that stands for disputing irrational beliefs. This is done by self-intervening at the belief level to bring self-awareness to the situation. This is done by asking three basic questions. 1, is the belief or attitude logically true? Is it grounded in reality? 2, is there sufficient evidence to warrant the belief? And 3, is the belief helpful to your goals, values, and well-being? If you get 3 no's, congratulations. You have just identified an irrational belief. If acted upon, is likely to produce negative consequences with respect to your stated goals and values. You can simply stop there and take no action as depicted in the no action, no consequence option, or you can replace the cognitive void you just created by replacing it with a philosophy that is consistent with both reality and your stated goals. This is where you can get really creative. Remember, this is your life and your canvas. The ABCs are here to help you make decisions that are internally consistent by presenting the same 3 questions. Once you get 3 yeses, you are justified in acting on this belief. Lastly, notice that with automatic behavior, the best consequence is that nothing bad happens, and the worst consequence is that bad things do happen. But the inverse is true with the DiBs model. The worst case is that nothing of any consequence happens, whereas the best case is that you produce consequences that help you reach your goals. So in summation, we are looking to reduce automatic judgment as depicted in the ABC model default condition on the left, and increase our decision-making of the other 2, especially in the third values-driven decision-making model. Next up, the unconditionals: unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional other acceptance, and unconditional life acceptance. Unconditional self-acceptance, or USA. The concept, accepting oneself without judgment, regardless of achievements, failures, or the opinions of others. This involves recognizing one's worth independently of external factors. For example, John fails an exam, but instead of berating himself, he acknowledges his effort and decides to study differently next time, accepting that his self-worth is not dependent on a single outcome. In other words, we take a lemon and we make lemonade. Unconditional other acceptance concept: accepting others as they are without requiring them to meet your expectations or standards. This means understanding that people are fallible and have their own strengths and weaknesses. For example, Sarah's coworker frequently makes mistakes at work. Instead of getting angry, Sarah accepts that her coworker is doing their best and offers support and assistance. In other words, take a lemon, make lemonade. Unconditional life acceptance concept: accepting life as it is, with its inherent difficulties and uncertainties, without demanding that it be different. This involves understanding that life is not always fair or predictable. For example, Mark encounters traffic on his way to an important meeting. Instead of getting frustrated and stressed, he accepts that traffic is a part of life and uses the time to listen to a podcast or practice mindfulness. In other words, take a lemon, make lemonade. What are absolutes? Examples of absolutes are words such as must, should, need to, have to, never, always, and etc. They are necessarily irrational and untrue in that they are at best distortions of reality and at worst deceptions. They are commonly found in negative narratives, especially when you are disputing an irrational belief. You will find absolute language in your own belief. And you will not find absolutes anywhere in the unconditional world. They are also very commonly present in an ego fatigue context. And a great way to start practicing the absolutes, just commit 15 minutes a day to consciously looking for absolutes while watching TV or surfing the web or having a conversation at the dinner table, what have you. And just notice how often you and other people are using those terms that are not even aware of it. Tenet number 4, leading a balanced life. Illustrated on the left-hand side here, you will see a life balance wheel that you can find on the SMART website, in the SMART handbook, and on the SMART YouTube channel. So basically what you do, you'll see there's 8 slices, like 8 slices of pizza, and you assigned a category to each one, and then you rate each category by your level of satisfaction. You can see the yellow dots I filled in there for illustration purposes, and then next you connect the dots, and you see what kind of shape you make. Ideally, we're looking for a very round shape, but life doesn't usually act that way, so you'll get something probably that looks something like this. No worries, this is here to help you better understand where you're satisfied and not satisfied with your life, and so you can come up with strategies to make improvements. So it's all good. Thank you for watching this overview presentation of Smart Recovery. If you found this content helpful, give me a like and subscribe and help me spread the word. Or leave comments in the comment section below. Alternatively, you can email me directly at jballa@msn.com. Lastly, want me to create a specific video? Let me know. Thanks again and take care.